Let me start with something most people never admit to themselves. Discipline is not a personality trait. It's a decision you make repeatedly on the days you'd rather not make it. And if you stay with me for the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how ordinary people with ordinary willpower build extraordinary consistency, not through motivation, which is a liar and a fair weather friend, but through something far more dependable. Because here's the truth nobody tells you at the start of the journey. The people who made it weren't the most talented in the room. They were simply the ones who showed up on the days it made no sense to. If you've ever started strong and quietly faded by week 2, this is for you. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share isn't theory. It's the exact philosophy that separates those who dream from those who deliver. Let's begin. The first thing you must understand is that motivation is a spark, not a fuel source. It'll get you started on Monday morning, full of fire, ready to change your life, but by Wednesday, that fire is ash. What keeps the engine running isn't motivation, it's discipline. The willingness to do the thing whether you feel like it or not. Successful people aren't more inspired than everyone else. They've simply stopped waiting to feel like it before they act. The second thing you need to grasp is the power of small, boring, daily actions. Nobody gets excited about doing 10 push-ups, reading 5 pages, or making 1 extra phone call. But life doesn't reward the dramatic gesture. It rewards the quiet repetition. A few disciplines practiced daily turn into massive achievements over the years. And a few errors in judgment, repeated daily, turn into disaster. The difference between a fortune and a wasted life is often nothing more than a handful of small choices, repeated relentlessly, in one direction or the other. The third principle is this: don't set a goal to get somewhere. Set a goal to become someone. Most people abandon their habits because they're chasing an outcome instead of building an identity. But when your daily discipline becomes part of who you are, quitting stops being an option. Because quitting would mean betraying yourself, not just missing a deadline. Ask yourself each morning not what do I want today, but who am I choosing to become today? The fourth thing you must learn is to separate feelings from commitments. Feelings are unreliable weather. Commitments are the compass. If you only work when you feel inspired, you'll work about as often as it rains in the desert. But if you decide in advance, this is what I do, regardless of mood, you remove the daily negotiation with yourself. The strong don't feel stronger than the weak. They've simply trained themselves to act without waiting for permission from their emotions. The fifth principle, and one that changes everything, is the compounding nature of consistency. A single day of discipline looks like nothing. It feels almost pointless. But stack it for 30 days, 90 days, a year, and you're not looking at effort anymore. You're looking at transformation. The tragedy is that most people quit right before the compounding curve bends upward. Because in the beginning, consistency is invisible. Your job is not to see results today. Your job is to become the kind of person results eventually can't ignore. And the sixth and final principle, build an environment that makes consistency easier than inconsistency. Willpower is finite, but environment is silent and constant. Surround yourself with people, spaces, and systems that push you toward the discipline you're trying to build. Because relying on raw willpower alone, day after day, is like trying to swim upstream forever. Design your life so the right choice is the easy choice, and consistency stops being a fight and becomes a habit. So let me leave you with this. Showing up once is an event. Showing up every day, especially when you don't feel like it, is a character. And character, my friend, is the one thing life can never take from you once it's built. The question isn't whether you have what it takes. The question is whether you're willing to do the small, unglamorous thing today and tomorrow and the day after that until consistency becomes who you are. Let me tell you something about motivation that most people discover far too late in life. Motivation is a spark, not a fuel source. It ignites easily. A good book, a powerful video, a conversation with someone who's achieved what you want, and for a few hours, or if you're lucky, a few days, you feel unstoppable. You wake up early. You make the calls, you skip the excuses, and then almost without noticing, the spark burns out. The alarm goes off and the fire isn't there anymore. This is not a personal failure. This is simply the nature of motivation itself. It was never designed to last. It was designed to start something. And starting was never the hard part of life. Continuing is the hard part. Here's what nobody tells you when you're standing at the beginning of a new goal. Full of enthusiasm, the emotional high you feel in that moment is temporary by design. Your mind cannot sustain peak excitement indefinitely. It would burn you out in a week. So the wave comes down, as waves always do. And when it does, most people make a critical mistake. They interpret the absence of motivation as the absence of ability, or worse, as a sign that this goal simply isn't for them. They conclude, quietly and sadly, that maybe they don't want it enough. But wanting was never the missing ingredient. Discipline was. Discipline is different from motivation in almost every way that matters. Motivation is loud, discipline is quiet. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is behavioral. Motivation depends on how you feel. Discipline doesn't ask how you feel at all. It simply asks, what did you say you were going to do? And then it does that thing regardless of the answer. This is why discipline, not motivation, is the true engine of every meaningful achievement you will ever witness in another human being. The person who built the business, wrote the book, transformed their health, or mastered their craft did not feel inspired every single day for years on end. That would be an impossible standard for any human being to meet. What they did instead was far simpler and far more powerful. They built a habit that didn't require inspiration to operate. Think about that for a moment, because it changes everything. If your daily actions depend on your emotional state, then your entire future is being controlled by something as unreliable as your mood. And your mood is influenced by sleep, weather, other people's opinions, a bad meal, a stressful phone call. Is that really what you want steering the direction of your life? Successful people made a different decision somewhere along the way. They stopped waiting to feel ready. They stopped waiting for the motivational wave to return before taking action. They simply built the discipline to act first and let feelings, if they showed up at all, tag along for the ride. This is why I tell people, don't chase motivation. Build a system that doesn't need it. Decide in advance what you will do and when, regardless of how you feel in the moment. When discipline becomes the operating system, motivation becomes a pleasant bonus rather than a required condition. Some days it shows up and the work feels light. Other days it doesn't show up at all and you do the work anyway. And those, ironically, are the days that build the most character because they prove to yourself that you are no longer negotiating with your own excuses. Understand this clearly. Every person you admire for their consistency has had thousands of days where they didn't feel like doing the work. The difference between them and everyone else isn't that they felt motivated more often. It's that they made peace with acting without motivation a long time ago. They accepted a simple, unglamorous truth, that discipline is a decision made once and then defended daily, often in complete silence, with no applause and no audience. So the next time you wake up and the fire isn't there, don't panic and don't take it as a signal to quit. Recognize it for what it is. The completely normal, expected absence of a temporary emotion, and do the work anyway. Not because you feel like a disciplined person yet, but because doing the work is exactly how you become one. Motivation will get you off the starting line. Discipline will get you across every single finish line that matters in your life. Learn to run on discipline, and you will never again be at the mercy of how you happen to feel on any given morning. I want you to picture two people standing at the exact same starting point in life. Same opportunities, same 24 hours in a day, same basic intelligence. One of them decides to read 10 pages a day. The other decides not to. One decides to save a small amount from every paycheck. The other decides it's not worth the trouble for such a small sum. One decides to make one extra call, do one extra rep, show up 10 minutes early. The other decides those things are too small to matter. And here is the uncomfortable truth I need you to sit with. On any single day, both of these people look almost identical. Nothing dramatic separates them. But give it 5 years and you will not be able to recognize them as having started in the same place at all. This is the part of success that nobody finds exciting because there's nothing exciting about it. Nobody applauds you for reading 10 pages. Nobody notices when you do a small, quiet, disciplined action for the 400th day in a row. It doesn't trend. It doesn't impress anyone at a dinner party. And it certainly doesn't feel like the stuff of great achievement while you're doing it. But I want you to understand something about how life actually works. As opposed to how we wish it worked, life doesn't reward the dramatic gesture. It rewards the quiet repetition. The grand one-time effort, the all-nighter, the heroic sprint, the New Year's resolution shouted from the rooftops, makes for a good story, but it rarely makes for a good result. What makes the result is the boring thing done again and again and again, long after the excitement is worn off and long after anyone is watching. Here's why this matters so much. Small actions compound, not in a straight line, but in a curve. slow and nearly invisible at first, and then seemingly overnight undeniable. A single day of discipline adds almost nothing you can measure. It's genuinely unimpressive. If you save $10 today, you are not rich tomorrow. If you read 10 pages today, you are not wise tomorrow. If you make one extra sales call today, your business does not transform tomorrow. And this is exactly the trap that catches most people. They take an honest look at the size of their daily effort, compare it to the size of their dream, and conclude the effort must not be working. So they stop. They abandon the one thing that was actually building something, right before it had the chance to show up. But consider the other side of this same principle, because it cuts both ways, and this is the part people rarely stop to consider. A few errors in judgment repeated daily are just as powerful as a few good habits, except they compound in the wrong direction. Skipping the workout doesn't ruin you in a day. Overspending a little doesn't bankrupt you in a week. Putting off the important conversation doesn't destroy the relationship overnight. But repeated, day after day, month after month, those small neglects become the entire shape of a wasted opportunity, a damaged health, a relationship that quietly died from 1,000 small absences rather than one dramatic betrayal. The same law that builds a fortune, left unattended, builds a disaster. It's the same law either way. Direction is the only variable you actually control. So here is what I want you to take from this. Stop asking whether today's action is big enough to matter. That is the wrong question, and it will talk you out of the very thing that would have changed your life. The right question is simpler. Does this action point in the direction I want 5 years of my life to move toward? If yes, do it, even though it's small, even though it's boring, even though no one is watching and no one will know, especially then. Because the people who build extraordinary lives are rarely the ones who did something extraordinary once. They are almost always the ones who did something ordinary, consistently, for longer than everyone else was willing to. Discipline isn't glamorous while you're living it. It only looks glamorous in hindsight, once the small, quiet, repeated actions have finally compounded into something the whole world can see. Your task is to keep doing the small thing today on faith before the world can see it, because that's the only day any of us ever actually have to work with. There is a question I want you to ask yourself honestly, because the answer to it will determine whether your next goal survives past the first hard week or joins the long list of things you meant to stick with. The question is this: when you set out to build a new habit, are you trying to get somewhere or are you trying to become someone? Most people, without realizing it, choose the first option. They set a goal to lose the weight, to hit the sales number, to finish the course, to reach the milestone. And once that goal is clearly defined, they attach their entire motivation to the outcome. The problem is that outcomes are distant, uncertain, and slow to arrive, while the discomfort of daily discipline is immediate and constant. So the gap between what I'm doing right now and what I'm trying to achieve someday becomes wider and wider. And somewhere in that gap, most people quietly give up. Here is what I've come to understand about lasting change. Goals aimed only at outcomes are fragile, because they depend on staying emotionally connected to a result that hasn't happened yet. But a goal aimed at identity is a different animal entirely, because it doesn't ask you to wait for the future to feel like progress. It asks you to become the kind of person who does this today, regardless of when the result shows up. There's a profound difference between saying, I'm trying to lose 20 pounds, and saying, I am becoming someone who trains every day. The first is a project with a finish line. And like all projects, it can be paused, delayed, or abandoned once it becomes inconvenient. The second is not a project at all. It's a description of who you are, and abandoning it would mean abandoning yourself. This is why identity-based discipline is so much more durable than outcome-based discipline. When your habit is tied to an outcome, missing a day feels like a delay, mildly disappointing, but easy to justify. I'll catch up tomorrow. But when your habit is tied to identity, missing a day feels like a betrayal of who you've decided to be. And that discomfort is far more motivating than the fear of a missed deadline, because it touches something deeper than convenience. It touches self-respect. You're no longer negotiating with a goal. You're negotiating with your own sense of who you are. And most people, once they've truly claimed an identity, will defend it with far more consistency than they ever defended a target number on a spreadsheet. Let me put this another way. If you ask a person chasing an outcome why they're doing something difficult today, they'll often give you a distant, abstract answer, because I want to reach my goal eventually. But if you ask a person who has built their identity around the discipline, the answer is immediate and personal, because this is who I am. One person is postponing their sense of accomplishment to some future date that may or may not arrive. The other person is living their accomplishment right now, in the action itself, regardless of what the scoreboard says today. That's a profoundly different relationship with the daily grind. And it's the difference between people who quit in month 2 and people who are still standing, still working, still building 5 years later. So, I want to challenge you to change the question you ask yourself each morning. Most people wake up and ask, what do I want today? And that question is dangerous, because what you want on any given morning is subject to mood, sleep, stress, and 100 other forces working against your long-term interest. Instead, ask a better question: who am I choosing to become today? That question doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't wait for motivation to show up. It simply asks you to take one action that is consistent with the person you've decided to be, and then to take that same action again tomorrow and the day after, until it's no longer something you do, but something you are. Understand this. People don't fail to change because they lack willpower. They fail because they never shifted the goal from something they're chasing to someone they're becoming. Chase an outcome, and you'll abandon it the moment it gets inconvenient. Build an identity, and inconvenience becomes irrelevant, because quitting is no longer an option on the table. It would mean quitting on yourself. Decide today who you're becoming. Act like that person immediately, and let the outcome catch up to the identity you've already claimed. There is a mistake so common that most people never even recognize it as a mistake. They've simply accepted it as the normal way to live. The mistake is this: they let their feelings make decisions that only their commitment should be allowed to make. They wait to feel motivated before they work. They wait to feel confident before they try. They wait to feel ready before they begin. And because feelings are, by their very nature, unstable and unreliable, waiting for the right feeling before taking action is a little like waiting for perfectly calm seas before you ever leave the harbor. If that's your strategy, you may never leave at all. I want you to understand something about feelings that will change how you plan your entire life. Feelings are weather, not climate. They shift by the hour. You can feel motivated in the morning and defeated by the afternoon. You can feel confident before a conversation and anxious the moment it begins. If you built your actions around something that changes this quickly, you would never accomplish anything of substance, because nothing meaningful is built in a single burst of good weather. It's built across seasons, through storms, through droughts, through the unremarkable gray days that make up most of any worthwhile journey. What you need then is not better weather. What you need is a compass that doesn't care what the weather is doing. That compass is your commitment. A commitment is a decision made once in a clear-headed moment that removes the need to make the same decision again every single day under worse conditions. This is a critical distinction, and I want you to hold on to it. Motivated people make decisions in the moment based on how they feel right now. Disciplined people make the decision once in advance and then simply follow through on a decision that's already been made. There's enormous freedom in this, because it means you're no longer negotiating with yourself every single morning about whether today is the day you'll show up. You already answered that question. You answered it the day you made the commitment. All that's left is to honor the answer you already gave. Think about how much mental energy is wasted by people who treat every single day as a fresh vote on whether to follow through. They wake up and ask themselves, do I feel like going today? And because that question is being asked fresh each time, with no prior commitment to defer to, the answer becomes vulnerable to whatever mood happens to be passing through that morning. A little bit of tiredness, a little bit of doubt, one uncomfortable thought, and the vote goes the wrong way. Compare that to someone who has already decided once and permanently, this is simply what I do. For that person, the question of whether they feel like it doesn't even arise, because the matter was settled long ago. They're not relying on daily motivation. They're relying on a prior decision that their present mood has no authority to overturn. This is precisely why the strong don't actually feel stronger than the weak on a daily basis. I want to be very clear about that, because it destroys a myth that holds a lot of people back. The disciplined person still feels tired. They still feel doubt. They still have mornings where the bed feels far more appealing than the goal. The difference is not the absence of those feelings. It's that those feelings no longer get a vote. They've been demoted from decision makers to background noise. The disciplined person has trained themselves to act in spite of the feeling, not in agreement with it. And over time, this becomes so automatic that it no longer even feels like a battle. It simply becomes what they do. So here is the practical shift I want you to make. Stop asking, how do I feel about this today? As though it were a meaningful question deserving of your obedience. Instead, ask, what did I already commit to? And let that be the only question that matters when it's time to act. Make your big decisions once in your clearest, most rational moments, and then remove yourself from the daily negotiation entirely. Your feelings are allowed to show up. They're allowed to complain. They're simply no longer allowed to decide. Build your life on commitments that don't bend to the weather, and you will find that the storms that used to stop you completely become nothing more than a minor inconvenience on the way to where you were always going. There's a moment that happens to nearly everyone who has ever tried to build something worthwhile, and it's the most dangerous moment in the entire process. It's not the moment you start. Starting is easy. Starting is exciting. It's not even the moment things get hard. Hard is expected, and most people brace for it. The dangerous moment is the long, quiet stretch in between, where you've been doing the work for weeks, sometimes months, and absolutely nothing seems to be happening. No visible progress, no breakthrough, no proof that any of it is working. This is the point where the vast majority of people quit, and it is, without exception, the worst possible moment to do so, because it's exactly where the real transformation is being assembled, invisibly, just beneath the surface. To understand why, you have to understand how consistency actually creates results, and it is nothing like the way we imagine it when we first set a goal. We imagine progress as a straight line, put in effort, get out a proportional result day after day in a steady and reassuring climb. But that is not how consistency behaves. Consistency behaves like compounding, slow, nearly undetectable at first, and then seemingly out of nowhere dramatic. A single day of discipline produces a result so small it's almost embarrassing to mention. One day of reading doesn't make you knowledgeable. One workout doesn't change your body. One disciplined hour at your business doesn't build an empire. And here is where the trap springs shut on so many well-intentioned people. They measure the size of a single day's effort, compare it honestly to the size of their dream, and conclude, quite reasonably it seems, that this small effort could not possibly be the thing that gets them there. So they stop, usually right before the curve was about to bend upward. I want you to picture compounding the way it actually works, not the way our impatience wants it to work. In the beginning, the line is nearly flat. You put in effort, and the return is barely visible. This goes on for longer than feels fair, long enough that a reasonable person starts to wonder if they're wasting their time. But underneath that flat line, something is happening that you cannot see. Momentum is accumulating, skill is compounding, relationships are deepening, reputation is building. Small gains are quietly stacking on top of other small gains. And then, at some point that cannot be predicted in advance and never announces itself ahead of time, the line stops being flat and starts to bend upward, slowly at first and then unmistakably. The people who are still there when that bend arrives are never the most talented people in the room. They are simply the ones who kept showing up through the entire flat part on faith with no evidence yet that it was working. This is the tragedy I want you to avoid at all costs. Quitting on day 80% of a journey that would have been upward on day 90, because from the inside, day 80 and day 90 feel identical. There's no signal, no dramatic sign, no moment where the universe taps you on the shoulder and says, just 10 more days. The only way through that stretch is to stop expecting to see results today and instead commit to becoming the kind of person that results eventually cannot ignore. That's the entire mindset shift. You are not planting a seed today and demanding a harvest tomorrow. You are becoming, through repetition, the kind of person who has earned the harvest whenever it finally arrives. And that harvest arrives on its own schedule, not yours. So here's what I want you to carry with you. The length of time you've already been consistent is not evidence against your effort. It's an investment already made. And abandoning it now doesn't protect you from wasted time. It guarantees it. Every additional day you stay consistent isn't just one more day of small effort. It's compounding on top of every day that came before it, which means your most recent days of discipline are actually the most powerful ones you've ever put in, even though they feel exactly as unremarkable as day one did. Stop measuring your progress by what's visible today. Start measuring it by whether you're still in the arena, still doing the work, still showing up on the flat part of the curve where nobody else is willing to stay. That's where the future is built. Not in the dramatic moment everyone remembers, but in the invisible, compounding stretch that almost everyone quits just before it turns in their favor. There's a belief that quietly ruins more good intentions than almost anything else, and it sounds so reasonable on the surface that most people never think to question it. The belief is this: if I just have enough willpower, I'll be able to stay consistent no matter what's around me. It sounds noble. It sounds like personal responsibility, but it is in practice one of the most exhausting and unreliable ways to try to build a disciplined life, because it asks you to fight the same battle over and over, using a resource that was never designed to be unlimited. Willpower is not a bottomless well. It's a muscle that fatigues with use. And if every single healthy choice you make requires you to draw on it fresh, you will eventually run out on the exact day you need it most. Here's what I want you to understand instead. The people who appear to have extraordinary self-control are very often not fighting harder battles than everyone else. They've simply arranged their lives so there are fewer battles to fight in the first place. This is the part of discipline that almost nobody talks about because it isn't as inspiring as a story about grit and determination. But it's far more practical and far more sustainable. Environment is silent. It doesn't need motivation. It doesn't get tired at the end of a long day. While your willpower is asleep, your environment is still working, either for you or against you every single hour, whether you're paying attention to it or not. Think about what this actually means in daily life. If your goal is to eat well, but your kitchen is stocked with everything that works against that goal, you are not fighting one battle a day. You are fighting that battle every time you open the cupboard, which might be a dozen times before lunch. If your goal is to focus on meaningful work, but your phone is within arm's reach, buzzing with notifications, you're not exercising discipline once. You're forced to exercise it constantly in small, exhausting increments until it finally breaks. This is why so many capable, intelligent, hardworking people still struggle with consistency. It was never a shortage of character. It was an environment quietly working against the very behavior they were trying to build, forcing them to rely on willpower to win a fight that better design could have avoided entirely. Now flip that same principle around and you'll see why it's so powerful. If you remove the tempting option from the equation, you no longer need the willpower to resist it. If you lay out your workout clothes the night before, you've removed one small decision that could have gone wrong in a tired, half-asleep moment. If you keep the book on your pillow instead of your phone, you've made the discipline the path of least resistance instead of the path requiring the most resistance. None of these changes make you a stronger person overnight, but they make the daily discipline require far less strength to sustain, and that's the entire point. You're not trying to become a person with infinite willpower. You're trying to build a life where infinite willpower is no longer the requirement. This is also where the people around you matter more than most are willing to admit. Surround yourself with people who treat consistency as normal, and consistency starts to feel normal to you too. You stop needing to talk yourself into it, because it's simply the atmosphere you're standing in. Surround yourself with people who treat excuses as normal, and you will find yourself, often without realizing it, absorbing that same permission to quit. You don't rise or fall to the level of your willpower nearly as often as you rise or fall to the level of your environment. The people, spaces, and systems that surround your daily life, whether you consciously chose them or simply let them accumulate by accident. So here's the final principle I want to leave you with. Stop treating consistency as a permanent test of character you must win alone every day through sheer force of will. Instead, become the architect of your own environment. Design your surroundings. So the right choice is the easy choice, and the wrong choice requires more effort than it's worth. Choose your inputs, your spaces, your habits, your company, with the same seriousness you'd choose your goals, because those inputs will either be pulling you toward consistency while you're not even trying, or working against you when your willpower finally, inevitably runs low. Build the environment first, and the discipline you've been struggling to force will start showing up on its own. So let's bring this all together, because everything I've shared with you today points toward one single truth. Motivation was never going to save you. It was only ever meant to get you off the starting line, not carry you across the years ahead. Discipline was always the real engine, quiet and unglamorous, doing its work long after the excitement wore off. The small actions you've been dismissing as too minor to matter are, in fact, the only things that have ever built anything of lasting value, while the small neglects you've been excusing as harmless have been quietly building the opposite. You are not here to chase a goal that lives somewhere out in the distant future. You are here to become someone, one ordinary day at a time, until the becoming is complete and the goal simply arrives as a natural consequence of who you've turned into. Your feelings will keep showing up uninvited, and that's fine. Let them visit, but never again let them vote. And on the days when nothing seems to be happening, when the results are invisible and the effort feels wasted, remember that you are standing on the flattest, quietest, most misunderstood part of the entire curve. The exact part where almost everyone else gives up, and the exact part where everything is secretly being built. Design your environment so that discipline doesn't have to fight your surroundings every single day, and you will find that consistency stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like simply who you are. Here is what I want you to walk out of this room and remember above everything else. Nobody becomes consistent by accident, and nobody stays consistent by chance. It is built deliberately in the unremarkable moments nobody else is watching. The early alarm, the page read, the rep completed, the phone call made, the promise kept to no one but yourself. And I want you to understand something clearly before you go. Today, right now, is not a rehearsal for some future version of your life where things will finally be easier. Today is the version of your life where the decision gets made. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when the conditions are perfect, because they never will be. Today. So don't wait for the feeling. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for proof that it's working before you're willing to keep going. Show up today on purpose and then do the exact same thing tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. Not because it's easy, but because you have finally understood the one lesson that changes everything. It was never about having what it takes. It was always about being willing to do the small thing, the unglamorous thing, the invisible thing, again and again, until one day you look back and realize that consistency was never something you found. It was something you built, one ordinary, unremarkable, unstoppable day at a time. Go build it, starting now.